come to order. It's now time for the committee to consider today's consent agenda, which basically just contains the minutes from our last meeting, probably the shortest minutes on history for this committee. Does any committee member wish to remove any item, i.e. the minutes, from the consent agenda? If so, please raise your hand or speak up. All right, hearing none, is there any objection to the approval of the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. Members, we have two items before you today, and I want to stress they're both information items. No votes taken today. These are items by which the provost and his team will present their thinking, and we will be in a position to ask questions, raise any concerns, offer guidance. The actual votes on these will come at our July meeting. So please be aware, no votes today. This is information and discussion only, and then the vote itself will come in July. So with that, item 2 is a discussion about the amendment to Title V regarding residency reclassification. The item will be presented by Lauren Blanchard, our Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost, and Ray Murillo, our Director of Student Programs. Dr. Blanchard, please begin.
Thank you so much, Chair Taylor. In accordance with the California Education Code and CSU policy, a campus determines an applicant's residency at the time of admission. This determination is for tuition purposes only. If determined to be a non-resident, the student may apply to the campus for reclassification within published timelines based on changes in their respective circumstances. Today, we present to the board recommended amendments to Title V regarding the criteria considered in the review of a residency reclassification. As part of these amendments, we propose additional categories for financial independence, which creates alignment with existing financial aid definitions. Determining financial independence is necessary only when a student requests a reclassification. I will now ask Ray Murillo, Director of Student Programs for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management, to open up this item for us today. Mr. Murillo.
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. So as just noted, a CSU campus determines each student's California residency status at the time of admission. The initial classification of residency requires that a student meet the requirements of physical presence in California and an intent to remain in California. A student who does not demonstrate both physical presence and intent is classified as a non-resident. A non-resident student may request a reclassification for a subsequent term. In addition to demonstrating physical presence and intent in California, the student must also demonstrate financial independence. These requirements require that a student not fall in any of the categories in the calendar year of the application and in any of the 3 calendar years prior. Claimed as an exemption for for state and federal taxes purposes by a parent or legal guardian, received more than $750 per year in financial assistance from a parent or legal guardian, or lived in the home of a parent or legal guardian for more than 6 weeks. Current language in Title V treats lack of financial independence as an automatic disqualifier for a non-resident student seeking reclassification. As a result, reclassification requests have been denied even though compelling arguments existed for the reclassification. I'd like to take a moment to share with you just one real-world example of this, though there are many. A prospective student who is married moved to California to attend graduate school and as a result of her partner's job. The prospective student was admitted as a non-resident graduate student for fall 2018. In fall 2019, the student requested a reclassification review. Although independence from parents is implied by marriage, other common statuses such as active duty military or veteran or former foster youth, in this case, the student was denied due to existing financial independence requirements. This proposed amendment seeks to address the needs of students with unique situations by providing criteria for when financial independence shall not be considered in a reclassification analysis. As shared earlier by Dr. Blanchard, these categories are now in alignment with existing categories that qualify a student as independent as articulated by financial aid. Specifically, this change would include the following student populations: dependent students with parents who have resided in California for more than 1 year, those enrolled in a graduate or post-baccalaureate program, a student who is 24 years of age by the residence determination date, or a student who is married or has a registered domestic partner as of the residence determination date. The change would also include additional student populations such as active duty military, a student with a legal dependent other than spouse or domestic partner, former foster youth, ward of the court, or for whom parents are deceased, a student who is an emancipated minor, or a student to be determined unaccompanied youth who is homeless or at the risk of becoming homeless. Again, all of the requirements for residency reclassification would need to be satisfied by the student. The proposed amendments would simply identify circumstances in which a failure to meet financial independence would not result in an automatic denial of a reclassification. I will now turn back to Executive Vice Chancellor Blanchard for his closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Murillo. As stated earlier by Chair Taylor, the proposed Title V amendments are presented today as information. This item will be presented again at the July 2020 Board of Trustees meeting for board action to adopt the proposed amendments to Title V. At this time, Mr. Murillo, Dr. Lolo Hong, Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Enrollment Management, and I are available for any questions or comments you might have.
Thank you very much, Provost Blanchard. I'll start with the first question, then I'll open up to members of the board. And I see Trustees Fagan and Eisen in the queue. How many students are we talking about here? Is it 5? Is it 500? Is it 5,000? Give us a sense of scale.
So we queried the campuses real quick to see how many reclassification requests that they received from July 1, 2019 to present. And right now, what we gathered from 19 of the campuses, there was a total of 769 students who actually requested a reclassification to a resident student. 54% of those were actually granted. 46% of those, or 357, were denied.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Trustee Fagan, followed by Trustee Eisen. Doug, take it away.
So money is always an issue, but in the last couple months, money is more of an issue. So it sounds like it's only a few hundred students, but every penny counts these days. How much are we talking about in possibly giving up?
So when I did the cost analysis, I was just looking at the current year data and those who were denied, the 357. Many of the data elements that we're looking to add into the category that would allow that the student would not need to go through financial independence, we don't track in our system, like those who are married or those who have dependents and so forth, other than a spouse and so forth. So I kind of just modeled based on the 357 students who would be paying the full non-resident students. And I primarily looked at undergraduates enrolling in 12 units per semester. So if this change were, and I looked at a 10%, 15%, and 20% increase of reversals of those denies that we know that exist today on the campuses. So based on that, if we looked at a 10% denials that were reversed, we're looking at 36 students. That cost difference is not insignificant, however. It does account for a reduction of student fee revenue of $342,000. At the 15% reduction rate, now it's 54 students who would have been reversed, and that's $513,000. And at 20%, that goes up to 71 students who would have had their denials reversed, and now it's at $674,000. So that's the fiscal impact on what I'm only able to do kind of that type of modeling based on the number of denials that we currently have today. But hopefully that kind of gives you a ballpark figure of what the impact may be.
Two very quick other follow-ups. One, remind me again what the difference is on these tuitions for graduate school, resident versus non-resident, and is financial aid interacting in any of this?
So as a non-resident, depending on the category status, they could be receiving Pell Grants. They're not eligible for any state aid or grants or anything like that. But to go back to your question on the difference, again, I'm looking at undergraduate costs. So, and I didn't look at the mandatory campus-based cost or fees. So the annual tuition fees for just state university fees is $5,700. The difference for non-resident fees at a student taking 24 units is $9,500. So the difference again is at $9,500, and that's where that cost difference is that I was calculating. So the total tuition for a non-resident student, undergrad student, is $15,246 if they take the 24 units. And I have to add, I did use the 24 units because the average unit load for non-resident students is just above 12 units per semester. So that kind of gives me the closest ballpark figure. And I should add also, of those 357 students who continue to pay non-resident fees, that's a revenue fee of $5.44 million. And at the highest rate of 20% that gets reversals, that 5.4% goes to 5.4 million goes to 4.7 million.
And the motivation behind all this is just, it's the right thing to do?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So one, the education code doesn't distinguish as to who this applies to. So we have to blanketly apply this across all students. So in the case of the students, and we had 3 cases this year that the student was married, but yet because it went 4 years back, they get caught up in this financial independence, which that kind of assumes that the students are independent if they're married, particularly for several years. The other issue is with foster youth and other populations like military, active military, and veterans, that just applying the financial independence just doesn't make sense.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Trustee Fagan. Let's go to Trustee Eisen, followed by Trustee Sebelius. Becky?
So just for clarification, the example you gave of the woman who came out here, her husband or her partner is here, she would not have to establish financial independence under these new rules because she is married or because she is married to a Californian?
No, so in that example, so the financial independence wouldn't apply because she's married. There's actually 2 reasons in what we're proposing why it wouldn't apply to her. One is because, one, she's a graduate student, and also the other category that we listed is that she's being married. So even an undergraduate student being married would make it that we would not need to apply the financial independence requirement.
And they could be married to, someone in Denmark. It doesn't matter.
Well, that is true, but we have to remember that the physical presence and intent to remain in California still applies. So we do have instances where students do come to California solely for the reason to attend school, but their permanent home is in a different state. And married couples do this for work, they do it for school, a lot of reasons. So if that student is married to someone in Denmark and that is his or her permanent home, then they would never be able to pass the physical presence and intent to remain in California test. So although financial independence wouldn't apply, they still probably would likely not qualify for the resident tuition.
Got it. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you, Trustee Eisen. Let's go to Trustee Sebelius. Romy?
Yes, thank you. With all due respect, it seems to me that asking what will it cost the CSU is completely the wrong question here. My understanding is that with the proposed Title V change, we are trying to fine-tune the law and we are trying to strive for more accurate assessment of the residency status of our student and hence their eligibility to pay in-state tuition. It is not about granting additional students who are not otherwise residents or a break. So it is just fairer. It is intended to make the proof of California residency fairer and more accurate. And if that is the case, then, well, if they're bona fide residents in California, then these students are entitled to residence tuition, and we shouldn't even be asking what will it cost us.
Well, okay. Again, I would stress to members, we'll get a few more bites at this apple. I think it comes back to the Committee on Ed Policy in July, correct, Provost Blanchard? And if our recent experience with occupational therapy is any example, it'll probably go to the Finance Committee after that. So my guess is there are probably 3 more hearings on this very subject. Lots of time for us to be thinking about any other questions and shooting them to the staff team so we can have a learned discussion as we go. Are there any other questions on item 2 before we switch to item 3? Okay, thank you very much, Provost Blanchard. We'll now move to item 3, which is, again, a discussion item for information only regarding an amendment to Title V as it pertains to the CFU General Education Breadth Requirements, also known as Ethnic Studies Requirement. It will be presented by Lauren Blanchard and Allison Wren. Dr. Blanchard, please begin.
Thanks again, Chair Taylor. More than 50 years ago, heeding the convincing call of both students and faculty, San Francisco State University became the first university in the nation to create a College of Ethnic Studies. From this groundbreaking milestone, numerous departments of ethnic studies have flourished across the CSU, offering hundreds of courses that give voice to the history and experiences of communities of color. What's more, these offerings have helped inspire civil rights efforts and social movements across the state to uplift other groups that have faced discrimination or oppression. Today, our CSU students have an increased sense of belonging, and for many, a passion for positive social change as a result of the voices sounded more than a half century ago. And while we may have different perspectives on the pathway forward, I believe we are all in agreement that it is our responsibility to prepare our students to contribute to a global, multicultural society through relevant curriculum, a pedagogy that is responsive to cultural differences, and an inclusive CSU community that supports the success of every one of our students. The CSU must continue to guide our students to recognize and to understand the vast variety of personal experiences, histories, societal and institutional barriers, and worldviews that exist among us, and to respect, explore, and to learn from these differences and define the common humanity amongst us. And that is why, after much consultation with faculty, campus leaders, we are proposing an amendment to Title V requiring all CSU undergraduate students to complete one 3-unit lower division course in ethnic studies and social justice as part of CSU General Education Breadth. Our CSU history of empowering hundreds of thousands of students across California in overcoming social, cultural, and economic barriers to attain their goal of earning a college degree has provided a legacy of a more inclusive university enriched by a multitude of experiences and perspectives. And the interest in and demand for a shared experience in ethnic studies have not diminished. From San Francisco State University's milestone in 1969, the CSU system has flourished with courses and departments in ethnic studies, as well as campus-wide efforts such as Cal State Northridge's Civil Discourse and Social Change Initiative. And on the 50th anniversary of the founding of the first College of Ethnic Studies that I referenced earlier at San Francisco State University, we celebrated the establishment of a second college, Cal State LA's College of Ethnic Studies. As its mission states, we will develop leaders who engage in rigorous, self-reflexive study that motivates critical engagement, self-determination, and decolonial understandings of the world. Today, as a result of the COVID-19 global pandemic, we are reminded of both the relevance of ethnic studies as well as social justice. We see the inordinate and often disparate impact that social, political, economical, and environmental upheavals continue to have on communities of color. It has laid bare the need for all of our graduates to participate in addressing these disparities to ensure a more just and civil society. And so it is against this backdrop that we are recommending the first substantive change to CSU's general education breadth in 40 years. The adoption of an ethnic studies and social justice requirement ensures we can support the success of students today while preparing them to lead tomorrow. Dr. Allison Wren, Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Programs, Innovations, and Faculty Development, will now share more information about this proposed amendment. Dr. Wren?
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. Ethnic studies gives voice to marginalized groups and produces systems of knowledge that equitably support a democratic and multicultural society. It includes a specific focus on 4 historically defined racialized core groups: Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latino Americans. The study of social justice leads to the application of these concepts to multiple forms of oppression and discrimination within society, despite hierarchical institutional structures. This context includes considerations of actions to identify, mitigate, and eliminate these forces through the elevation of activism, free speech, and democratic processes, as well as providing resources to support development in areas such as leadership and multicultural organization. The goal of an ethnic studies and social justice requirement is to prepare students to live and work in a multicultural society through an academic experience that will develop their intercultural cognizance, sensitivity, and commitment to social justice. This definition also aligns with academic work occurring in California community colleges, where the associate degree for transfer in social justice studies examines identity issues such as gender, race, class, ethnicity, and nationality as they intersect with the social justice issues of racism, sexism, classism, and other oppressive structures within society. Over the last few years, we have experienced increased momentum in articulating a shared future for advancing both ethnic studies and social justice in the CSU. In 2014, Chancellor White convened the Task Force on the Advancement of Ethnic Studies that generated meaningful conversations across all 23 campuses. After extensive work, the 2016 Task Force report captured growing interest and demand for ethnic studies. It also highlighted challenges, including inconsistencies in how curriculum is delivered. One of the primary recommendations of the report was to make ethnic studies a GE requirement. In distributing the report, the Chancellor emphasized that, quote, campus autonomy and shared governance with respect to the role of faculty in designing curriculum and academic programs cannot be usurped by this report, but can be informed by it. Thus, I ask campuses to engage in robust discussion, end quote. And the impact of that report is evident in a nearly 9% increase in enrollment in ethnic studies courses in the past 2 years, and the hiring of 71 new tenure-track faculty in ethnic studies departments across the CSU in the past 4 years. Adding an external voice to the discussion, Assemblywoman Dr. Shirley Weber authored Assembly Bill 1460 that would establish a new ethnic studies graduation requirement for all CSU undergraduate students. The bill would require a 3-unit course in ethnic studies restricted to 4 specific academic disciplines: Native American Studies, African American Studies, Asian American Studies, or Latina Studies. In January of this year, the Academic Senate of the CSU passed a resolution that requested the Chancellor White, consider an ethnic studies requirement. This resolution was crafted after discussion with members of the CSU Ethnic Studies Council. 2 members of that council attended the Academic Affairs Committee meeting of the ASCSU to provide background and input. Feedback solicited by the Office of the Chancellor from all 23 campuses on this first resolution demonstrated support for the concept, but many who responded recommended a more broadly defined curricular requirement and greater campus autonomy. A second resolution by the Academic Senate in March further encouraged that the requirement should be broader in scope, to include experiences of additional historically oppressed groups such as Jewish, Muslim, LGBTQ, and women. It also recommended that campuses should operationalize the ethnic studies requirement and associated learning outcomes through normal curricular processes in a manner appropriate to its campus culture and context. It is clear that there is no lack of interest, passion, and commitment among our many stakeholders, and we respect all the voices in the discussion. We appreciate the spirit behind the proposed legislation requiring ethnic studies, and we acknowledge Dr. Weber for continuing to be a champion of ethnic studies. However, legislative interference in the curriculum of the CSU, regardless of content, is a bright line for both the Academic Senate of the CSU and the Office of the Chancellor. As a result of our consultation, the following amendments to Title V address the need for a CSU-created, system-wide, inclusive approach. It ensures consistent quality and access while still allowing for the autonomy and flexibility for faculty to support student success at the campus level. Moreover, the proposed amendments respect the expertise of CSU faculty, the curricular processes on each campus, and are more inclusive and reflective of today's students and their needs. As Dr. Blanchard shared in his opening remarks, the proposed amendments specify that California State University undergraduate students will be required to complete 1 3-unit lower division course in ethnic studies and social justice as part of CSU General Education Breadth. The CSU General Education program must remain at 48 total units. To accommodate the addition of an ethnic studies and social justice requirement, there will be 6 instead of 9 undefined lower division units in the social science section of CSU GE Breadth, commonly known as Area D. As is currently the practice with all areas of CSU GE Breadth, a system-wide definition of ethnic studies and social justice will be articulated in an executive order. The creation of learning outcomes and the courses that will meet these outcomes will be established by each CSU campus based upon this definition. Its scope would be inclusive of the 4 historic disciplines of ethnic studies, as well as the experiences of historically oppressed groups such as Jewish, Muslim, LGBTQ, and women. CSU BA and BS degrees would still maintain the 120-unit total. We propose implementation in the 2023-24 academic year to allow for the time required to work collaboratively with faculty and campuses to create the needed policy and curricular changes across the system. Finally, as half of our undergraduate students begin their baccalaureate degrees at the California Community College, the proposed inclusion of a new 3-unit general education requirement in ethnic studies and social justice not only will align with the framework of the CSU's general education breadth in preparing for transfer, but also aligns with the approach and nomenclature the CSU and community college faculty have taken in developing the associate degree for transfer frameworks. The California community colleges offer 40 associate degrees for transfer. Among them is an ADT in social justice studies that includes the various disciplinary templates you can see on screen. The proposed amendment would have no impact on the popular ADT pathway from California community colleges, as it will be embedded in CSU GE Breadth. Nearly all community colleges offer coursework in ethnic studies and social justice topics, with 35 community colleges offering full ADT programs in social justice studies, which includes ethnic studies disciplines. I now turn back to Dr. Blanchard for his concluding remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Wren. The proposed ethnic studies and social justice requirement will serve as a signature component of a CSU degree by reflecting the unique communities we serve, as well as the varied experiences of our students. More importantly, this new requirement will reinforce the CSU's standing as a university of inclusive excellence. As specified in the March 2020 Academic Senate resolution, courses that meet this requirement shall either focus on the intersection of race and ethnicity and describe how resistance, social justice, and liberation as experienced by communities of color are relevant to current global issues, or they shall focus on other factors in understanding hierarchy and oppression, such as class, gender, sexuality, religion, spirituality, national origin, immigration status, ability, and/or age. These amendments were presented today to the board as information only. Based on your discussion, this item will return for action at the July 2020 meeting. At this time, Dr. Wren, Mr. Leo Van Cleve, Assistant Vice Chancellor, Mr. Nathan Evans, Chief of Staff, and I stand ready to answer any questions or hear any comments that the board has to offer.
Thank you very much, Provost Blanchard. I have 3 trustees in the queue, Trustees Morales, Simon, and Fong. Ugo, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, thank you for your presentation. To me, the backdrop is the pandemic with disproportionate number of families of color not having broadband, disproportionate number of families losing their job, and disproportionate number of children of color not having access to broadband or being able to take advantage of the education that they should be getting, along with, to me, the backdrop for this at this time is the high number of African American and Latinos that have been impacted, and other, by the way, Native American and others that have been impacted in their death disproportionately in this pandemic. And to me, I'm just going to be using very few words. The proposed ethnic studies requirement is effectively not a requirement as presented. The proposed ethnic studies requirement is in name only. And I say this in utmost respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Morales. We've got Trustee Simon, followed by Trustee Fong, Kames, Eisen, and Abrego.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much, Chair. Just a couple of thoughts. I mean, at the July meeting, I would urge this board and ask you, Chair, if we could allow a substantive presentation. I know the time is always short given where we're at in this moment, but from members of the Ethnic Studies Council. I understand that the CSU has a magnanimous collection of academics who have focused much of their career on the development of ethnic studies. So I would love to have some, when this item comes up before your committee and to the committee as a whole, if it does, for the board to understand not only the history of ethnic studies, but to get a better understanding of what is being taught. There was some of that in this presentation. I definitely appreciate it. But what brought me to ask for this kind of presentation is, I'm concerned, and some of the nomenclature here, because social justice is not ethnic studies, and I don't think that was the intention, but also ethnic studies is not multiculturalism. In 1968 and 1969, many of you know, my aunt, Carlotta Simon, was one of the few who pushed for and was in the center and leadership of the student strike at San Francisco State. That 5 months of day in and day out was a call and a demand for academics and the institution, not only at San Francisco State, but around the country, to stop the erasure of the lived experiences, the real history and future of people of Native descent, of folks of African descent, and folks of Latinx and Latino descent. And that call and that push was not only because the curricula was absent of those experiences, but for many of those young people, for the first time in their lives, when they came on that campus, they saw other students and other teachers, professors, and staff members that looked like them. The idea that this community would be inspired not only by the existing ethnic studies departments and schools in the CSU community, but frankly, by Dr. Weber's legislation, that push for us to firmly look at and understand the importance of being in a class and going to Fresno State as a young Latino and on your first day getting Manuel Pastor's book, State of Resistance, and learning and understanding that it was students like him or her or they who changed the face of California because of their activism, because of ethnic studies. They learned that not only were they important, but they were crucial to the democracy. Or for students, and I'll stop here, of folks who were able to attend Dr. Julia Hare's class, or Oba DeShaka at San Francisco State, and they were given a book. It came before Columbus. If you hadn't read it, you should read it. And it talks about the international trade that happened not only on these shores, but others by people of color from various continents. Ethnic studies, for many of us who deeply believe in, as I believe everyone on this board and our staff and our leadership believe in, the process of education liberates us. And we know in many of the sectors, we see what happens when students who become leaders have yet to understand the beauty, not only of diversity, but of the power of their peers. We end up having conversations and pushing for folks to take on positions like directors of diversity, simply because racism and colonialism and those things that have not been untaught remain pervasive in academia. So I'm extremely excited that we're having this conversation. I just want to thank you, Dr. Blanchard, for your work. And I want to thank, I believe, probably about 35 young people who wanted to speak today. I would encourage you to write all of us. We will absolutely read and think about and meditate on your words. And thank you for your participation. I'm done, but I've been receiving some emails today from students who wanted to speak. So I just wanted to make sure that I took some time to tell a few of their stories and those professors that they lifted up, including Professor Abdullah out of 7 of her students just emailed me within the hour. So I just want to lift up that experience. You guys have probably gotten those emails too.
We haven't.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Trustee Simon. Let's go to Trustee Fong, followed by Trustee Kames.
Thank you, Chair Taylor. I appreciate it. And some of you may know that I am in Asian American Studies. So I know the importance, the value of ethnic studies. And I think it's important. I have heard the public speakers, I have read those emails, and I understand the importance of what they are saying and what they are conveying to us. And what they say weighs a lot on me. One thing about the CSU proposal, ethnic studies and social justice, for those who are pushing for the 4 historically traditional ethnic studies programs, it's not excluding those programs from those students who wish to take them. And I think with the Ethnic Studies and Social Justice proposal, it is inclusive and it is reflective of our mission and our goals. And I think it's important that it's almost the difference between old school and new school. And I welcome the voices of all of those public speakers and encourage more of them. One thing, though, that I would like to have addressed is that the CSU proposal is something that, from what I understand, the Academic Senate agreed to, that the requirement should be broader than the 4 disciplines. I also think it's important that the CSU and our campuses on the campus level be given the opportunity to create the programs that are reflective of the campuses, of the students, and the faculty at the campus level. One concern that I do have with the AB 1460 is that the requirement would begin as early as 2021. And if Dr. Blanchard could address the timeline versus the timeline of the CSU proposal. And also, there's a difference in costs. If you could also address that, Dr. Blanchard.
Would you like me to address those, Dr. Blanchard?
I'm sorry, it took me a little while to get my finger on the button here to remove the audio piece. So I'll start, and then if you could add in, Allison, I'd appreciate that. That certainly with respect to the timeline, the way that the bill, AB 1460 bill is currently constructed, you are correct that the time in which the new requirement would be implemented would be in 2021, which is obviously next academic year. And the timeline that we're proposing for the new course requirement would be the 2023-24 academic year. And because we believe and know wholeheartedly the time that it takes to process this information on a respective campus, meaning that there's quite a bit of work that's got to be done in terms of the development of learning outcomes. And then after the learning outcomes, really working this proposal through the various committees on the campus to make sure that everyone is in agreement with the direction that the requirement will take. And then on top of that, you heard earlier that this requirement, because of the stipulation that we have to keep this within a 48-hour general education requirement, that means then we have to make some decisions as per which course will be stricken, if you will, or which course will the faculty decide should be the course to be eliminated from Area D. So it's going to take some time to get this done. And obviously, we also have to write the executive order. And so all of that takes time to get everything in place. And I have to say that 2021, and certainly Allison can chime in there, that's an unrealistic time frame, especially given the COVID period. But even outside of the COVID period, thinking that it could all get done by 2021 is unrealistic. The other piece is in terms of the cost side of it, mainly in the report itself. I don't have it right in front of me. Allison, why don't you help me with this?
Sure. When we did a cost analysis of AB 1460, which we provided to the legislature, and the Department of Finance actually supported our estimate. The biggest cost is that right now we have about half of our students don't take an ethnic studies course, and so we'd have to provide one for them. And so that could be up to $13 million in ongoing costs for us. In terms of administrative costs, we have some departments that, or some campuses that don't have any departments of ethnic studies or have very small, limited departments. And so there would be administrative costs of close to $3 million to establish those departments. And then there'd be a one-time cost to re-review all of the associate degrees for transfer to make sure that those ethnic studies courses would fit within. And so that would be a one-time cost. Then there would also be, outside of our system-wide costs, the community colleges would face substantial costs. And we didn't estimate that, and the legislature would be mandated to pay those costs for them. But for us, it would be unfunded.
Thank you. Chair Taylor.
Thank you very much, Trustee Fong. Let's go next to Mariana Kames and then Becky Eisen, followed by Trustees Abrego and McGrory. Mariana?
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm just looking at the summary chart on page 4 of 7, agenda item 3. And so I was looking at the bottom where it says departments that could offer these courses. Just kind of, so if we look at the ASCSU resolution/recommendation, it says a broader range of departments than AB 1460, including the experiences of additionally historically oppressed groups, such as Jewish, Muslim, LGBTQ women, but should otherwise retain the core definition of ethnic studies. And then the CSU part of the summary says any academic departments that can meet the course learning outcomes as defined by the campus. I just kind of have a question about like why the difference there and why kind of go a little bit broader, because it's kind of making at least the intentions of this, at least for me, a little bit confusing, just to kind of put that out there.
So our proposal, as we do with all of CSU GE Breath, we establish a very broad definition, and then we ask the campuses to create learning outcomes. AB 1460 would require central learning outcomes, which we don't do for any section of general education. So campuses would be allowed, based on their circumstances, within our broad definition of what an ethics studies and social justice requirement means for the system, to create outcomes based on their campus community. And the outcomes at San Marcos will be somewhat different, but not totally different than, say, Humboldt. And then the faculty on the campus determine which courses meet those outcomes. So it'll be regular curricular processes. Most campuses have a general education committee. Departments submit a course and say, I think my course meets these outcomes, and the general education committee will make that determination.
So thank you for answering that. And I guess my second question, this is just out of curiosity. I know that AB 1460 and then the resolution by ASCSU both call it ethnic studies. Is there a reason that we call it ethnic studies and social justice, and what does that encompass?
You know, I think we want to signal to campuses and to our students the broader notion of social justice and the inclusion of more of the historically oppressed groups. You know, I think the Academic Senate resolution does indeed include those groups, but didn't include a broader title. There's certainly one of the things in an earlier iteration, we had included the term diversity and as well. And with feedback with the various the Academic Senate and others, we learned that diversity was far too broad and covered too many things and became a requirement about nothing, really. And so we agreed with that and listened and supported that. But we think that in our conversations that the notion of social justice is really not only a piece of ethnic studies, but a piece of other groups that grew out of the ethnic studies movement 50 years ago, whether it was disability studies, gay rights, there's a variety of groups. And so we think that that's a more inclusive term for the CSU.
And then, I'm sorry, just one last question.
Okay, we still got five more trustees in the queue.
So basically, based on everything that we just talked about in regards to, transfer students in the community colleges and then the costs that you were mentioning, in terms of like us having enough sections out and just talking about like impaction, how would that look like, since this is more of a requirement? And like you just stated, half of our CSU students basically, as of now, don't necessarily meet that requirement. So I'm just curious to see how we would go about that.
If we had the very restrictive 4 departments, that would be tougher. But we have women's studies departments, women and gender studies departments. We have Jewish studies across the system. So we have a variety of departments across the system who would meet a little bit broader requirement. And so there wouldn't be as much of a bottleneck as you're alluding to. Okay.
And then just, would there be is there some sort of like list that you have on hand or that we might get that basically, at least even though it's broad, says what kind of departments we should expect to see those classes in?
We wouldn't create that centrally. Again, that would be based on the outcomes that each campus developed.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Trustee Eisen, followed by Trustee Abrego.
Thank you, Trustee Taylor. So this is being proposed as an amendment effectively to our general education requirements. And so I thought it might be helpful to sort of think about those bigger requirements that we impose on every student. GE requirements have been around forever. Ours, as Lauren explained, have been around for 40 years, unchanged. And the GE requirements are the sort of mark of a liberal education. They are those essential skills and those areas of substantive knowledge that universities want all of their students to possess as part of their college degree. It is the sort of opposite side of the major requirement, which is very specific. And our general education requirements typically break down into these essential skills like written communication and critical thinking, and these substantive areas. You'll take a couple of courses in the arts and humanities or in the social sciences or in the physical sciences. This proposal, which I think is a good one, adds in a component of values that most GE requirements don't have. It has this notion that we will not only give our students the basis for being lifelong learners, but give them a sense of values that will also make them successful in the world that they're going to enter. But like every GE requirement, the question always is, what do we consider to be essential and who gets to decide? So the board has in the past typically taken a very high level, these are the basic areas that we want our students to possess before they go out in the world with a CSU degree. Then the question of which class would satisfy which requirement and what learning outcomes do we want the student to have achieved, that is left to, am I right about this, Allison and Dr. Blanchard? That is left to the faculty because they are the experts in those specific questions of what is it that is going to be taught in this class that would fulfill this broader requirement that we impose upon our students. And by the way, the 48 units that we impose upon our students is roughly twice what most institutions impose upon their students. Our GE requirements are very, very heavy compared to the vast majority of four-year colleges. So when we impose a requirement, it's got to be really important, really important. And this is really important. That's what we're saying, I think, with this suggestion. We consider this to be as important as critical thinking or having a background in physical science. This is essential to being a CSU graduate. But the details of it, it seems, must be left to the experts, the faculty. And what I like about this proposal, as opposed to having the legislature tell us what to teach, is that it does allow, if I'm understanding this correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, that if one campus decides that a course on the Holocaust would satisfy this requirement, then a student could take a course on the Holocaust and have satisfied this requirement. But under 50, do I have the right number? 1540?
1460.
That course would not satisfy the requirement there because it's not part of this, the four departments that would be allowed to teach the class. And it has to do with oppression, it has to do with social justice, but it doesn't have to do with the four cultural group that the legislature would be talking about. So if I've said anything that's incorrect, please correct me, Dr. Blanchard and Dr. Wren.
Dr. Eisen, Dr. Eisen, I've given you your doctorate. Trustee Eisen, I know after spending
I have a doctorate theoretically.
After spending 2 years with you studying GE, I know you understand things. You're correct that this is a statement of our values, but it's also ethnic studies and social justice studies. Both are substantive academic bodies of knowledge and should be recognized as such. They're not just about our values. So
thank you, Dr.
I think that's important.
Great. Trustee Abrego, your hand got taken down in the chat function. I still had you in the queue if you want to ask a question. Sai. Trustee Abrego. Did we lose you? Maybe we did.
He's there. I think he's trying to unmute. I see him there.
He's on mute. Abrego's on mute. Sai, turn off your mute.
Nobody can hear you, buddy. Yeah, you're probably muted.
Did you have someone else and then we can come back to Sai?
Yeah, let's go to Trustee McGrory and then we'll come back to Trustee Abrego.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, all right. There we go. Trustee Abrego.
The master control person unmuted me. That's great. I also wanted to comment on the number of speakers who spoke this morning and were very passionate about ethnic studies and what it's done for their lives and how it has improved their educational success and so forth. The board received a letter from the CSU Council of Ethnic Studies to remove this item from the agenda. They expressed concern that the current recommendation that we're considering now, does not align with the CSU Ethnic Studies Task Force commitment to the advancement of ethnic studies. The recommendation put forth by the CSU Ethnic Studies Task Force, it was shared by Dr. Horace Mitchell, former president at CSU Bakersfield, and included several distinguished individuals from our campuses, including Dr. Mildred Garcia, Dr. Elliot Hirschman, Dr. Leslie Wong, and several of our CSU campus vice presidents. Their recommendation was straightforward. Make ethnic studies a GE requirement throughout the CSU system. In their letter to the board, CSU Ethnic Studies Council's claims being left out of the conversation to expand on the original recommendation that now includes the social justice component. They are asking to be invited to participate in proper consultation with the Chancellor's Office and the CSU Academic Senate. In my view, curriculum is best left to faculty, and that's all faculty, including faculty from the CSU Ethnic Council. And we as a board should allow time for the consultation process to develop and take place among the curriculum experts before we vote on any amendments to Title V. One other thing I would like to add, when you read the task force report, you really get a genuine feeling for enhancing and sustaining the important role of ethnic studies. But when you place ethnic studies in a position to compete with mainstream departments, which will be the case here, ethnic studies will once again be pushed to the back of the line. So I strongly urge the committee members to ask that the Chancellor's Office and the Academic Senate consult with the Ethnic Studies Council.
Okay, thank you very much, Trustee Brigo. Let's go to Trustee McGrory, followed by Trustee Campbell, to whom we will give the last word before wrapping up. Again, members, I stress, we'll have another bite at this apple, another chance to discuss at our July meeting. Jack?
I guess I'm concerned about what Sai is saying to make sure that we're following the right process. I don't know what the answer to that is, but when I see Hugo and Sai, I'm very concerned about the way this thing has developed. That concerns me. I just want to make a statement. I'm sure there are going to be people in California who say that we are just doing the politically correct thing by including this as a requirement. And I'll just share with you my experience was growing up in a white Irish Catholic neighborhood in South Boston, going to a mostly white private university at Colgate, and then going into the Marine Corps and becoming a platoon commander, picking up 50 Marines, and 3 of them were white, and everybody else was of color. The one course that I took at Colgate that made a difference to me in my career was African American Studies. I learned something about how to manage the cultural issues, how to deal with the historical issues in that platoon, and without that kind of coursework, I would not have done as good a job as I think I did. So I think it's a really important requirement, but I think we need to make sure the process that we're using is the right one.
Thank you. Well said, Trustee McGrory. Trustee Campbell, bring us home with our last question and or comment. Trustee Campbell, we're not hearing you.
Sorry, I didn't.
There you go.
While I agree with the importance of ethnic studies and also social justice, I had a question regarding AB 1460, the Academic Senate proposal and our proposal. So correct me if I'm wrong, Allison or Lauren, but what I understood from a lot of the speakers was that only ethnic studies professors, PhDs, would be teaching the classes, especially under the AB 1460, because only they have the, the standing, the skills for that subject. And as you said, only half of our students currently are taking an ethnic studies course. So we would then have to be providing twice as many courses in ethnic studies in those 4 areas. So is that where this extra cost comes from? Because then we would need to be hiring more ethnic studies professors and in the timeline here. So during this COVID crisis, when they're going to be cut, I'm sure, drastically, we would be then having to hire a substantial amount of new professors. Is that the way, is that how you see it, Lauren, or?
Yes, that's exactly how we see it with AB 1460.
Okay.
There would obviously be some things made up by other departments losing courses, but it would require the hiring of a substantial number of ethnic studies faculty members.
All right, thank you. That answers my question.
Well, thank you, members. Robust discussion, lots to chew on and discuss. Again, when we get an opportunity to revisit this issue in July. With that, Mr. Chair, that concludes the meeting on educational policy. Passing the gavel back to you.
Thank you, Chair Taylor.